If you're familiar with indie games at all, you've probably heard of roguelikes and roguelites. But what are they? How are they different from each other? And why do people enjoy them so much? So let's get into it. First, some basics. Both of these genres spawned from a game called Rogue, which was an adventure game from the 80s, hence the name roguelike, or like the game Rogue. Roguelikes were the first of the two genres to arise, but both roguelikes and roguelites have two core elements of Rogue. They have random level design, and they have permadeath. The random level design ensures that each run you play through the game is different, and the permadeath means that, when you die, and you have to start back from the beginning. So all the games in these genres play with these two elements in their own unique way, with their own unique game mechanics, etc. So now let's compare the two genres. Roguelikes are the more purest of the two genres, and they're more faithful to the gameplay of the original Rogue that they're both based off of. This mostly plays out with how the permadeath works and how the games have progression between the runs. So both roguelikes and roguelites often have some form of progression between runs or between deaths. This can take very different forms between the two genres. I like to think generally of two forms of progression: vertical and horizontal progression. Horizontal progression is progression that changes the flavor of the game in some way without changing the difficulty. The most common form of this is unlocking different characters that you can play as that have different abilities, different playstyles, or maybe unlocking different weapons depending on the type of game you have. This form of progression is usually seen in both roguelikes and roguelites, and it's an easy way for devs to add more flavor and some more replayability to the game, which are very important for both these genres. Vertical progression, on the other hand, is progression that does change the difficulty in some way. This can be seen in games like Hades or Dead Cells, where you can level up abilities between runs that make completing a run just easier. But vertical progression can also be about making the game more challenging in some way. So for example, in Slay the Spire, you have 20 ascension levels that you can climb, each of which is progressively more difficult than the last one. Roguelikes, on the other hand, shun this change in difficulty, this vertical progression, instead preferring to let the player simply master the skills as opposed to requiring any amount of grind or leveling up in order to beat the game. This lack of vertical progression, or really more importantly, the lack of vertical progression that makes the game easier, is really the main thing that separates a roguelite today from a roguelike. Roguelites focus on this progression, and it's the core of the genre, in addition to obviously the permadeath and the random levels that we talked about earlier. But roguelites can differ in other ways too than roguelikes. For example, Grifflands bends the permadeath mechanic by giving you a save point you can only use once. Roguelites also tend to have more gameplay mechanic diversity with a mix of card games, twin stick shooters, tactical games, etc., whereas roguelikes tend to have more stringent requirements of what fits the genre. Another thing I'll say about these differences before I get into why people like myself enjoy these genres so much is that they can be somewhat vague differences, and some people will argue about what games might or might not fit each genre. For example, traditional roguelike purists will limit roguelites to grid-based, turn-based games, but nowadays people will say games like Spelunky or Faster Than Light are roguelites, even if some dedicated fans object. You might also hear people use the term roguelike-like. It means basically the same thing as roguelite nowadays, but some people also think of it as an intermediate genre between roguelikes and roguelites. It seems kind of unnecessary to me, so I just lump roguelikelikes with roguelites, as most people do nowadays. So that's just to say that these terms have changed somewhat over time, but the main thing to take away is that roguelites just have more cross-run, cross-death carryover, some more progression than roguelites, specifically in the form of leveling up characters or getting stronger between runs in some way. So are these genres fun? I personally really enjoy both roguelikes and roguelites. They are more gameplay-focused games, and good roguelites and roguelites have incredibly enjoyable gameplay loops. They're really geared around replayability and improving your skill at the game. You get to learn the enemies, how to respond, how to get better at the game, but you aren't repeating the exact same levels, so it doesn't feel repetitive in the same way, at least if the roguelite's done well and has a good amount of level variety. The roguelites that I enjoy the most have both vertical and horizontal progression, and that's because I think both vertical and horizontal progression are nice in order to increase the replayability of the games. It's fun to play through these games with a different skill set or different abilities on different characters that you've unlocked. And it's nice to feel some form of progression between runs, so they don't all feel completely worthless. It doesn't feel like if you die, you've just wasted your time. And it's also nice to be able to climb up the difficulty in games after you've mastered the base game, after you can get a clear, after you can complete a run pretty consistently. Again, since these are such gameplay-focused genres, things like scalable difficulty are super important for a good quality roguelite in my personal opinion. Of course, not everybody enjoys both these genres. So some roguelike fans might actually dislike roguelites because they want more true permadeath. If you carry over progress in some form of leveling, unlocks, etc. between runs as you do in most roguelites, it's not really permadeath in the same way. You're not really starting from nothing. The game gets easier to beat the more you play it, so it can feel like grinding is more important than skill at the game, which is why some people who like roguelikes prefer them and dislike roguelites. They don't like that grind, they don't like that leveling. Realistically, I found that most good roguelites have a pretty quick cap of unlocks that you really need to beat the game, so I'm not really bothered by that grind at all. Usually, in my experience, by the time you're good enough to actually, get a full clear, beat the game, you have the unlocks that you need to have. And I actually enjoy the feeling of progression and that feeling of unlocking things between runs. I also like that a lot more roguelites are just more innovative than traditional roguelikes. Hades, for example, found a way to work story into a roguelite in a way that no roguelike has. And of course, some people don't like either roguelikes or roguelites. Because the genres are so gameplay focused, some people really miss the narrative elements. And because of the permadeath and starting over, some people get frustrated or just feel like the game is a waste of time, especially if they lose before completing it. Some people also think that the randomly generated levels just aren't enough variety to keep them engaged. And all these critiques actually, I think, have some weight, and the things that I think about when I review roguelikes on this channel. So I talk about the progression, their replayability, the gameplay of the roguelites. Are they fun? Is the random generation frustrating? Is how far you go in the run decided by whether you get the right random things? Or does that randomness just sort of bring freshness and keep the game from getting boring, keep the game from getting stale? If you want reviews of those elements, you can check out all my roguelite reviews on my channel, and I'll be ranking my top 5 roguelites of all time next week. So subscribe if you want to see that. Thanks for watching.